Every year, we all look for that next wave of fantasy football players that can take us to the promised land and ultimately help us win those league championships. And that's exactly what I have for you all today with some wide receivers that I think are giving us crazy value in long-term upside based off of where they're going on mock draft boards as we speak today. These are players that I think, because of positional scarcity at the running back, potentially the tight end position, are being driven down draft boards but have really, really great fantasy value themselves. So we're going to talk some draft strategy today. We're going to talk about how you can capitalize on these players and get this really great upside. So let's hit the intro. If you're new around here, make sure you go down and click that subscribe button first of all and give this video a like so other fantasy players like yourself can find my content, and let's get started. Here we go. So there's absolutely a trend to today's video. You're going to see that play out very, very early here with the grouping of these players. They're pretty cramped together on the draft board, and where they're going in ADP, it's very, very similar, and they kind of fall one right after the other. There's a little bit of gaps here of some players I didn't like quite as much, but we're going to see this play out here. So if you haven't done a mock draft in a while, head over to either sleeperfantasy.com. That's my favorite mock drafting tool right now for the 2021 offseason, but wherever you host a fantasy football league at, you're probably going to be able to find some sort of a mock drafting tool or resource for you, whether it's ESPN, Yahoo. We've got Underdog Fantasy right now where you can go out there and get yourself hooked up with some games and enter some best ball leagues. There's a lot of services out there. So NFL.com, their fantasy football site, has some mock drafts as well. So regardless here, Keenan Allen is my first player up on the board here as a league winner. Why? Well, right now Keenan Allen's ADP is 26.2. In general terms here, speaking on the SFS channel, we typically refer to league sizes and just automatically pencil that in as 12. So that's the ideal league size here for SFS. Again, a lot of you guys are probably going to have, last year when I was doing weekly advice and whatnot, we had some 14 leagues that I was helping out here. But obviously there's 8-team, 10-team, 12, even some 14, 16 league teams I was helping out with last season. So regardless, it doesn't matter where this falls on your draft board for you, because the value is still, in theory, going to be the same. Because, if a player's being picked at the 26.2 position, that's not going to vary across leagues. Maybe it will potentially based off of some scoring formats, but that's only going to change things slightly by a pick or two either way. So Keenan Allen, 26.2 for 12-team leagues. That places him at the top of the third round in our mock draft boards. The top of the third round. This is a guy who can be a wide receiver freaking one. This is absolutely league-winning value and my favorite receiver to be drafting at that wide receiver one draft position right now. And my main piece of advice that I want to hit off the board right away here is that you shouldn't automatically exempt the other top receivers at this position prior to the spot in the draft. Like, you shouldn't eliminate and completely fade the wide receiver position out of your fantasy football market, because there are going to be situations when teams go so RB early very, very quickly in the draft, so RB heavy very early on in the draft, that it's going to drive guys like Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Calvin Ridley way down boards. And there's going to be a potential where there's going to be a mixing between value, upside, and the ADP where you just can't pass on a player like a Devontae Adams. And it would be foolish of you to do so and reach on a running back who's not going to return as much value as an Adams would. But here, if you're able to capitalize and get yourselves a top-end running back one, maybe you come back and get another RB2 who can produce RB1 numbers, has really elite upside, you are set. And I really love to be balanced here on the channel. I don't like going running back 3-4 rounds in a row all the time. It's certainly a viable strategy at various points on your draft board. But for the most part, I think what plays out well here is trying to find a balance. And if you're able to have one of those top end and third round picks, going running back in the first round, coming back, hitting it in the second round, and then letting a Keenan Allen slip to you here is crazy high value. In just 14 games last season, Keenan Allen had 147 targets. That is a ridiculous mark for a player who played, again, 14 games. That's as many as Devontae Adams had last season. And for a player in an offense with Justin Herbert, these are numbers that are probably going to trend up next year. He has the grasp of the target share in this offense, 27%. And again, that number doesn't count or go up when he's missing those 2 games, 14 out of 16 games played. Once again, to be at that 27% marker and miss 2 games is absurd. The only players who were actually targeted more in respect to their team's overall work share was DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, who had the highest of the bunch, and Stephon Diggs. And it's honestly not shocking at all to see Keenan Allen up here. When he's healthy, this is one of the best wide receivers in the league. Such a pure route runner, such a dependable player. He's a PPR monster because of the target volume he gets, and ultimately he ends up bringing in a lot of those targets and giving you those free and easy points for making the catch. So he didn't quite break 1,000 yards last season. That's something I think that will certainly trend upwards this year. He had about 8 touchdowns. That's probably fairly standard for him. I expect that number will remain somewhat consistent throughout the rest of his time with the Chargers. And obviously, once again, he signed a contract extension last season. So not that that matters for 2021 fantasy football purposes. But nonetheless, the value is insane here. In those 12-team leagues, again, you're getting him at the top of the 3rd round. And as you get that league size smaller and smaller, that's going to fall down. And maybe he could end up being a 4th-round pick for some leagues out there. So Keenan Allen, this guy can be a wide receiver 1 producer and a very, very, very elite and dependable one at that. So we need to be taking Keenan Allen on our draft boards. This, again, is something that can help shape the rest of your strategy for the way you attack things. Again, you can go out there and pick those players, those RBs, those elite players, but don't just reach on a running back just to do so, because we can find players like this later on, and things are going to be different every time. Like I said, maybe one time Devontae Adams goes at the 1-5 in your draft boards, and you think, that's a bit early for a player like Devontae. He's a really great wide receiver, but maybe the value doesn't quite meet the draft position. Or there's going to be times when people go running back 8 picks in a row and Devontae Adams falls to the 1-9, in which case you should probably be drafting him. So you just got to be prepared here. Have names like Keenan Allen and the rest of those players on this list in the back of your mind, because these are guys that if you end up fading the wide receiver position in the first couple rounds, they're going to come back, give you great value, and I think a lot of these players are going to finish as wide receiver 1. So this next player is Allen Robinson, finished as wide receiver 11 for the Chicago Bears last year. Again, pretty much the same situation as the Keenan Allen here. Not quite as good of quarterback play right off the bat, but 16 games for Robinson last year, 151 targets, his 2nd season at that marker. Insane, in a row, I should say. Insane value. The only players with higher targets than Allen Robinson, Stephon Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins. So, yes, he outpaced Devontae Adams for targets, and this is a player who I think is one of the most underrated talents in the league that we have right now. Allen Robinson, if you go out and watch some of his highlights, go out and watch some of his best plays from last season, he's a contested catch freak. This guy goes up and mosses 1 or 2 DBs at a time, pulls down balls in the end zone, has some of the best hands that I think we've seen in a while here, and he just doesn't get the credit for it because he's played with garbage quarterbacks his whole career, and that's really limited his fantasy upside. He's always been a great floor play, such a safe player, especially, again, like Keenan Allen in those PPR leagues, because he gets such a high volume of targets that when he hauls those in, he's one of the most dependable players there is in the league. But this is an improving offense here in Chicago, and while Andy Dalton might be the starter for the start of the year, that's what Matt Nagy's been preaching, telling the media over and over again that there's no chance Justin Fields starts day 1. That's fine, because I've seen Andy Dalton. I've watched him get it done with A.J. Green on the field for years. And maybe Allen Robinson, who knows? I'm not going to be here to tell you whether or not he's as great as A.J. Green was at the peak of his prime. The answer is probably not. But nonetheless, he's a similar player, and Andy Dalton was giving A.J. Green top-end fantasy wide receiver stat lines while he was the starting quarterback in Cincinnati with the Bengals. So there is some hope here. And again, Andy Dalton was out in Dallas last year, and there's some Cowboy receivers I'm going to talk about later on in this list that you can go out and capitalize on because they were being so productive with such a mess of a situation last year. Things are only going to get better for him this season. But A-Rob, again, it's like the last 2 seasons. He's been one of the most slept-on wide receivers, and his ADP hasn't really changed that much when he has produced. So imagine what's going to happen when he gets Justin Fields in there, when those deep balls start rattling off, when he's able to make plays downfield, contested grabs, gets more end zone looks. This guy's a quarterback's best friend, and for a young QB who's coming in, his first season as a starter, obviously a very talented prospect and a guy we think very, very, very highly of, at least in terms of his draft stock and how he went in the first round as a rookie quarterback and whatnot. There's a lot of things that play into the situation, but A-Rob should be a very, very valuable asset in fantasy football leagues this year. And unless Justin Fields is a total flunk, a bust, and a disaster, I don't think that we have any reason to worry about Robinson because he's produced with Mitchell Trubisky, Blake Bortles, Nick Foles. The list goes on and on. Chase Daniel. Like, there's been such a laundry list of below average quarterback play that Allen Robinson has overcome during his career. So I am not worried about him whatsoever, regardless of who the starting QB is. And he's a guy that can be a wide receiver 1 any day, regardless of what the circumstances are. So Michael Thomas here, if you've been around on the channel, you know I don't like Michael Thomas at all in terms of a player. I think he's kind of a little, you know what, we're gonna refrain from using the choice words I have for Michael Thomas because I just think he's a diva. I don't enjoy watching him play. I think he's a bit annoying. He's a loudmouth. Whatever, regardless, there's plenty of diva wide receivers in the NFL. But Michael Thomas, during that record-breaking season, was a player in particular that I did not enjoy too much. So Saints fans, come at me in the comments section. It's all right. He still made my league-winning wide receiver video list. Michael Thomas is a player who absolutely has some risk, I guess you could say, and had his flaws last season, but honestly, what were we to expect? A guy who gets 185 targets in one season, 1,725 yards, only 9 touchdowns. That's still a ridiculous clip. Obviously, record-breaking years in multiple statistical categories, and having Drew Brees was a major factor of allowing him to get so many targets, but obviously Thomas is talented enough to deliver the end game and get us those stat lines that we saw at the end of the year. Nonetheless, these numbers came down, and I can't blame him for getting injured. The amount of workload that he sustained in 2019 was such a ridiculous rate, and it's something we had never seen before. This isn't something I expect MT to get back to. I don't think he will be a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2, maybe not even a wide receiver 3 finisher in the rest of his NFL career. But, and this, again, plays a large factor in the fact that, you know, Jameis Winston's the quarterback, or Taysom Hill, honestly. I'm just assuming that Jameis Winston might become the quarterback day 1 this year because I think he's the actual better QB prospect as opposed to Taysom Hill being your more dynamic Tim Tebow, trick play, nonsense, whatever. So Sean Payton's going to make this work, though. MT is one of the best short route running wide receivers. He's one of the best safety blankets for any NFL quarterback. And the quarterback change is going to be a big deal. Not having Drew Brees to make frequent, accurate passes, whether it's on a slant route, an out-breaking route, MT like to run post routes. He's going to find value, though, and that's the thing. He's a target hog. He's going to see a lot of opportunities. And I think that maybe the better fantasy situation plays out here if Jameis is the quarterback, because I think that then increases Michael Thomas's downfield targets, increases the amount of looks he gets on deep balls, and I think that's something that's very valuable to a fantasy receiver, especially a sure-handed player like Michael Thomas. I think he'll come out next year, probably be roughly in that top 12 wide receiver range. He potentially, if he gets enough volume, if he gets enough consistent play, I mean, we saw what Jameis Winston did with those Buccaneer wide receivers his last season there in Tampa. I don't know if he'll be quite that much prone to just slinging the ball downfield, but MT is one of the only players left on his team at the wide receiver position. I mean, Traquan Smith's a nice player. He's not going to take targets away from Michael Thomas, though. Emmanuel Sanders is gone from last season. So the barriers to entry for getting targets are absolutely not in play here. This is kind of a situation now where you look at Michael Thomas in 2021 like we looked at Devontae Adams last season. You know, there's a couple other guys that can get the job done. There's nice pieces there. But he is so far and away the clear-cut one option, and there's really nothing to infringe upon his workload there, that the floor is beyond safe for MT this season. We have no reason to worry outside of the fact that he could get dinged up again. But that's something, these weren't majorly significant injuries last year. They were bad enough where they kept him out of games, but that's because of the nature of the injury. They were such nagging, and the pain you sustain from those injuries and those plays really make it tough on you and really limit the ability you have to be even a shell of yourself and perform up to the standard of your play. So I think MT this season, he is going to get back to those volume numbers. Again, not 185 targets. That's uncharted territory, and I think that I would be just shocked and astounded if he came back and matched those totals. And I don't think it's possible to do that without Drew Brees there. But in PPR leagues especially, a player who gets this much volume is absolutely going to produce up to level with this here. And again, a mid-third round pick. It's absurd the value we're getting for Michael Thomas right now because of the injuries he had last season and because Drew Brees is not in the picture anymore. So there's still reason to be excited about drafting Michael Thomas in your fantasy leagues. It's not a flashy pick whatsoever. You probably won't walk away from your draft feeling amazing about it. And it's something that, again, as a not Michael Thomas fan here, I'm sorry, you guys, I can't do it. I'm just not a fan of him as a player. That doesn't matter here. You can see I'm keeping my personal feelings towards Michael Thomas out of the picture. He made the league-winning wide receivers list. That's what counts here. Please draft him in your fantasy leagues if he falls anywhere in the third round to you and you haven't already addressed the wide receiver position multiple times, because I think it's a bit over the top to pick receiver 3 times in a row on your draft boards. But if there is a situation where maybe you want double running back in the top 2 rounds, or you've went one running back, one receiver, one running back, and a potentially elite tight end like a Travis Kelce, maybe you picked somewhere late in the second round, took a Darren Waller, George Kittle, Michael Thomas is your guy. He absolutely can fulfill the wide receiver 1 role in your fantasy lineup. Then up next here, we've got Terry McLaurin. This is another situation where, what are we doing, you guys? We got to be picking Terry McLaurin higher than we are in fantasy leagues. And if he falls to you, again, in this third round range, you have to capitalize on the upside and the positional advantage that you're getting here. In my SFS rankings here, my positional rankings that I've got on sizzlefantasy.com, which you can see at the bottom of your screen, and you can get a link to that in the description of this video. Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry, is my current wide receiver 12 for the 2021 season. What does that mean? Well, again, going back to the beginning of this video, we use 12-team leagues as the standard, just kind of talking baseline here on the channel. So 12-team leagues, top 12 receiver, that makes him a wide receiver 1 for somebody's team. Terry McLaurin, great value here for a player. Again, this is 4 receivers now that we've got as wide receiver 1 producers that we can take advantage of and capitalize on in the mid to late third. We're creeping closer to the 4th round here. And Terry McLaurin's a guy who I don't even think has had the opportunity, kind of like an Allen Robinson, a misfortunate wide receiver, for the fact that he's just not had good quarterback play to this point in his career. Obviously, Terry McLaurin has had to endure it for a lot less of time, and Scary Terry has only played 2 seasons in the NFL, but entering year 3 now, he has Fitzmagic. It's not like it's an elite quarterback player or something that gives us a great sense of security at the position, but when you compare that to Dwayne Haskins, and yes, Terry McLaurin and Dwayne Haskins had a connection from college and some already built upon chemistry from prior to their NFL career, I still think Fitzmagic might be the better option here. You look at guys like Kyle Allen, Taylor Heineke, and apparently Taylor Heineke is getting buzz in camp right now, so some things to think about. But Alex Smith, coming off of a gruesome and career-threatening injury, is probably the best quarterback play that Scary Terry has had in his career, and while Smith was under center, Terry McLaurin was banged up last season. So a lot of things did not go his way and have not been going his way since he has arrived on the Washington football team. But 134 targets last season, only 87 receptions. I think that number is something we see go up, and I think his catch rate is something that increases over time here. And once he gets better and better quarterback play and more chemistry, I mean, it's been a quarterback carousel in Washington. If he can just get one guy to stick with and develop and really get a long-term relationship and connection with, that's something that I think will help that number as well. And like I said, 87 receptions, not that high of a number, and for 134 targets, something that I think is due for an increase. And then he only had 4 touchdowns last season. That's, again, something I think goes up. We're going to see an increase in that statistical category. He had more touchdown receptions as a rookie. So McLaurin's got a lot of upside here, and I think with Fitzmagic, he might be kind of a high ceiling play, low floor play, because we will see Fitzmagic have those games when he goes absolutely bonkers and basically takes over the fantasy football leagues for a whole entire week. If you've got a receiver or Fitzmagic himself on your teams, you're looking great for that given week, but other weeks, he'll put an absolute goose egg and a dud up, and I think that that's something we might have to watch out a bit for with Terry McLaurin. But if you're fine taking a player who might be a bit boom bust this season, with that boom being extremely, extremely high, think back to what a Deshaun Jackson did in Tampa Bay with Ryan Fitzpatrick when Deshaun Jackson was healthy. Like, Terry McLaurin is probably a better route runner than Deshaun Jackson and just as good of a deep threat. He has that straight line speed and that crazy athletic ability. He's going to be that player for this offense far and away who's making these tough catches, who's making these electric downfield, wow, eye-popping plays. So Terry McLaurin, he'll put up wide receiver 1 numbers if he's healthy and plays the whole season. Again, Fitzpatrick probably sends that ceiling through the roof that we've already seen is very high for McLaurin, but the floor is something I will address here and raise a red flag towards, because there are going to be some ugly weeks for Terry if Fitzpatrick is under center. Mike Evans is up next here. This is a player who, again, I don't think this is a flashy pick. I go back to Michael Thomas. I think that we've already seen the best from these two players. Michael Thomas, obviously, in 2019, and Jameis Winston in his last season, or excuse me, Michael Thomas in his last season with Jameis Winston. So a little bit of a quarterback swap here, but Mike Evans is a player who he got it done last season, and he wasn't a player I loved at all. If you go back and watch some of my videos, I don't know why you would do that, because the 2020 fantasy season is already over, but I talked about Mike Evans as a must-sell player for a lot of the season, and I wasn't liking him because I wasn't liking the volume, I wasn't liking the efficiency, and I wasn't liking the productivity I saw from him. But again, this isn't a flashy pick here. This is all about the draft price we're getting off of Mike Evans. Evans was a player who was being picked a lot higher last season because of, obviously, Tom Brady coming to town. But he only had 109 targets. That's the lowest count we've seen so far for anybody on this list. Only 70 receptions, and he barely cracked 1,000 yards receiving with 1,006. So the thing that he mainly got it done on was touchdown catches. And I think that's something that, in general, we don't like to project year over year for fantasy players, because it's something so inconsistent. It's literally one play on a drive or on a series, whatever you want to call it. And it's just not a dependable feature or element of somebody's game from year to year. But I think with Mike Evans, he might be the rare exception of a player where he was catching 1 to 2 yard touchdown passes on the goal line and being used as basically a super athletic tight end to just go up and moss defensive backs. And with Tom Brady in this system, I think that's something that's going to stay around and be a frequent part of this offense. There are so many weapons on this football team. Defenses literally have to pick and choose. You don't have the luxury of just locking everybody up. Players are going to get open and find their spots. Mike Evans is not the typical receiver one on a team where it's kind of him and the rest of the guys are just average, and you can put 2 players on Mike Evans, lock him up, game over. That's not the case. When you've got Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, O.J. Howard coming back off injury, and Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette, Giovanni Bernard out of the backfield. Heck, if you want to toss Cameron Brate in there as kind of a sneaky little weapon they've got, whatever. I mean, these guys just have a laundry list of targets to throw the football to, and they don't have the ability to just toss guys out on the field and double players up. So Mike Evans, I think, will get back to these numbers. I think this offense will become even more efficient this season. So even if we see that touchdown count drop by 3 or 4, but we just see the target share or the reception count increase, and in turn see the yardage go up, Mike Evans is a very, very viable player as a late 3rd, early 4th round pick, and a player, again, he can put up low-end wide receiver 1 numbers. So that's what we're looking for. That's why these players are league winners, because if you can wait to address the wide receiver position until this spot in the draft, you're still getting yourself those top-end performers and guys that can give you those numbers game in and game out. And again, Evans only had an 18% target share last season, so not a very big marker for the guy that we revere as the wide receiver 1 on that team. And then Julio Jones here. This is a pick. He's going in the 4th round right now. It's a very solid pick, I think, though. For a player that, A.J. Brown's already declared, I want to hand over the wide receiver 1 role to Julio Jones. I'm not sure how relevant that is, whatnot. Who cares? I guess it reduces the drama in Tennessee, and Tannehill's still going to throw the ball to the open man and who he wants to. But barring injury, as long as Julio Jones has health on his side, he will put up infrequent wide receiver 1 numbers. And what I mean by infrequent is that it's not going to be every single game. He's not going to be a guy who consistently dominates like he did in Atlanta. But at the same time, he's a player who I think has the capability in this offense to score a touchdown in 1 play. Because when you have Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown already sucking up defensive help and defensive attention from the opposing team, running a play-action ball simply in single coverage can get Julio Jones over the top for a 75-yard touchdown at any given play if the run game is being that effective. So this is a player that I think we haven't really seen him have the capability or the luxury. Calvin Ridley is a great player, but he's not quite an A.J. Brown if you ask me from a pure talent perspective. They are going to have to give both of these guys defensive help, and there's going to be times when the coverage shifts to A.J. Brown, and that leaves Julio Jones in a really great scenario to make a huge touchdown play. So Julio, not exactly the flashiest pick once again. He's had his risks, his concerns, banged up frequently last season. but I think he's going to be a highly efficient player with the Titans here. Not necessarily a high volume guy, but a player that does a lot with the opportunities he's given and puts up some very impressive numbers on a per game basis. Amari Cooper next up here. If you want to talk about a player who could be that Stephon Diggs territory that we saw last season, obviously Stephon Diggs was roughly a early to mid 4th round pick at the end of fantasy drafts last year. That's kind of what we're looking at with Amari Cooper here, a early 4th round pick, highly talented wide receiver, really great upside, and I think he can only improve based off of what he did last season. The Cowboys offense was such a disaster. He only had Dak Prescott for a true 4-game performance stretch, and he still saw 130 targets, 1,114 yards, and only 5 touchdowns. And Cooper's not a guy that's going to be a red zone monster and rack up a ton of receiving touchdowns, but it's something that I think will increase. His ceiling is certainly going to drive up. And the more important thing for me with Amari Cooper is the floor is going to get even better. And maybe Cooper won't see 160 targets like Stephon Diggs did last season, but when you see 130 targets, when you're talking about having quarterbacks like Ben DiNucci, Garrett Gilbert, Andy Dalton in there at the starting position, I mean, you're still being fed the football. 130 targets is a very significant marker to be at, and he saw the 21% target share in this offense. So still the leading receiver, still the wide receiver 1, and the most valued player on the field for the Cowboys. Dak's coming back this year, and he's already, talked about how he wants to put the injury in the past and just go forward towards the future. Amari Cooper is going to see those numbers go up. He's going to be getting better passing reps. He's going to be getting better opportunities in this offense, and he's going to be producing with them. And this is going to be kind of a track meet football team where they're just hanging points on people's heads and putting up massive fantasy stat lines. So I love Amari Cooper this season. He's a player, again, he can put up. He has a very easy capability and potential to reach a top 12 wide receiver ceiling and get in there and be a wide receiver 1 throughout the entire season. And then back-to-back here, the last player I've got on this list, again, obviously the trend here was round 3 and 4 wide receivers that give us crazy good value and potential to be wide receiver 1 producers at the position with such a discounted draft price, is CeeDee Lamb. And CeeDee Lamb, obviously, the second best receiver in that Dallas offense, but these guys have such a high passing volume, I'm not concerned about sharing the workload or any of that relative stuff. CeeDee Lamb still got his last season, 109 targets, 74 receptions, and a lot of wow plays, a lot of spectacular catches. In particular, I believe it was against the Vikings, that one he made in the back corner of the end zone. This is one of the most talented young receivers we have in the league, and eventually I think CeeDee Lamb will take over the wide receiver 1 job here in Dallas. I don't know if it's going to be this season. I would look towards the end of that Amari Cooper contract or whenever the team moves on from him. But CeeDee Lamb absolutely has the potential to one day be a top 3 fantasy wide receiver. I don't know if it's this season, but the top 12 possibility is certainly there this year. And he finished as wide receiver 17 last year in his rookie year. So no Dak Prescott, again, Garrett Gilbert, Ben DiNucci, Andy Dalton. The production was still there. And what I love about CeeDee Lamb is he played a lot in the slot last season. Obviously, he can line up outside, but he's a player that's able to run every route in the route tree and get open from any spot on the field. So CeeDee Lamb wearing the double 8s for the Dallas Cowboys, a player you absolutely want to target in the fourth round of draft boards, as a player that gives you top-end upside at the position. There you have it. Those were some rounds 3 and 4 wide receivers you absolutely have to be trying to get your hands on here in this season of fantasy football. In rounds 1 and 2, make it all about the running back position, getting elite RB1 upside. And then you can come back here and find yourself a handful of wide receiver 1 potential producers in these 2 rounds of the draft board. You got to be racking up stacked good draft rounds, pick after pick after pick, and eventually you'll be having such a strong roster compiled throughout the first 4, 5, 6 rounds of the draft after we start addressing those positions later on this offseason that you set yourself up so well for success in the early picks of your draft board that your fantasy roster is going to have really great depth, a really strong starting lineup, and you're going to be looking really good for next season. So thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, click that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, and as always, you got to have that bell on so you're notified whenever I come out with a new video or go live. For example, we're going to be doing a subscriber mock draft here in a couple weeks. So head over to the Discord that you can find down in the description as well to join that up. Those people will be the first with access to that mock draft link to join that video up. So thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace out.